A quiet click of the door lock in an empty apartment usually means returning home, to safety and peace. But for a man who has spent the last months in the shadows, performing tasks that are not spoken of even in whispers, this sound becomes the beginning of the final act of his personal drama. He enters the room, places his rain-soaked briefcase on the table, and freezes, listening to the unnatural silence. At that moment, behind him, it's not just a door slamming shut, but a trap closing, built by the system he served faithfully and truly. This specialist has just successfully completed a mission, eliminating a serious threat to the interests of his state. He expects gratitude, a well-deserved rest, or, at worst, a new assignment. However, the cold logic of the security apparatus dictates otherwise. He who masterfully severs others' life cycles, in the eyes of his handlers, himself becomes a dangerous piece of evidence. The most critical moment in a professional's life comes not when crossing a border or in the midst of an operation, but precisely when he returns to the embrace of his native structure, becoming an superfluous element in a perfectly calibrated formula of secrecy. The Institute of Special Assignments has existed as long as statehood itself. For centuries, rulers needed people capable of acting outside official laws and moral norms. These executors became living tools, solving issues that could not be settled at the negotiating table. But every such tool always had its expiration date. As soon as the task was completed and the political landscape changed, yesterday's heroes turned into bearers of dangerous knowledge. The problem was that the secrets they possessed had no statute of limitations. One wrong move, one accidental word in a bar, or an attempt to write memoirs could bring down entire governments and destroy international alliances. The system always recognized this risk and developed self-cleansing mechanisms that operated with mathematical precision and absolute lack of emotion. The logic was simple. No bearer, no problem. If one looks at the history of the mid-20th century, especially the period of the great confrontation between two systems, one can see how this mechanism worked on an industrial scale. The era when the world was divided by the Iron Curtain demanded the emergence of an entire class of specialists whose existence was officially denied. These were people without names, whose biographies were rewritten several times, and whose ties to reality gradually thinned. When such an agent reached a high level of mastery, he learned not only the technical details of operations, but also the true motives of his superiors. He saw the underside of political decisions, understood who was actually behind state coups and accidental plane crashes. And it was this awareness that became his sentence. The system could not allow such a volume of data to move freely in space, even if its owners swore eternal loyalty. Belief in human reliability was an unforgivable luxury for the bureaucratic machine. The external facade of this process always appeared flawless. For society, and even for regular departmental employees, the disappearance of an elite operative was presented as an accident, a sudden deterioration of health, or a heroic end to their life's journey in the line of duty in a distant land. Internal archives were meticulously purged. Personal files were sent to shredders or locked in safes marked "to be kept forever," which, in the language of special services, meant until the complete elimination of the bearer and any memory of them. Technologies for eliminating their own employees were constantly perfected. Methods included drugs that left no traces in the body, staged domestic incidents, or even accusations of treason, which allowed for the legal removal of a person from the game. It was a war on two fronts, against an external enemy and against their own shadows, which had grown too long. Special attention was paid to those who worked in the so-called Liquidation groups. These specialists possessed unique skills and a specific psychology. They became accustomed to viewing the world as a collection of targets and obstacles. When such a group returned from a mission, it represented a cohesive team with a shared secret that bound them more tightly than any oaths. And it was precisely this cohesion that frightened the leadership. History records many instances where entire units, having successfully completed delicate assignments, suddenly faced a series of tragic circumstances. One would get into an accident on an empty road. Another would suddenly fall ill with a rare disease. A third would disappear without a trace during a vacation at a ski resort. These were not coincidences. This was a planned registry cleansing, aimed at breaking the chain of witnesses and leaving only one link: the highest political leadership, which itself never soiled its hands. The inner world of such a liquidator in the final weeks of their existence was a zone of constant tension. A high-class professional always senses when they begin to be viewed as an object. The tone of conversations with their handler changes, a strange intonation appears in the voices of colleagues, and figures that shouldn't be there begin to emerge behind them. It's a strange paradox. A person who has spent years tracking others suddenly discovers that all their knowledge and experience are now directed against themselves. They begin to notice microscopic changes in their usual routine. A car parked near the entrance for slightly longer than usual. An unexpected call from HR offering an unscheduled medical examination, or the strange behavior of an old friend who suddenly starts asking too many clarifying questions about the details of a past operation. At this moment, the agent realizes that they are no longer the hunter. They have become the prey. The personal conflict here reaches its peak. Loyalty to the system, to which a person has dedicated the best years of their life, clashes with the instinct for self-preservation. Most such specialists genuinely believed that their actions served the greater good, protected national security, and ensured the peaceful lives of millions of citizens. The realization that for this very system they are not heroes but an annoying byproduct becomes a devastating blow. This is an identity collapse. If you are the arm of the state, how can you defend yourself against your own body? Many in such a situation fell into apathy, voluntarily accepting the proposed ending, unable to resist the structure that had been the meaning of their lives. Others, however, began their own game, trying to use accumulated compromising material as insurance, not realizing that the existence of such insurance only accelerated the process of their neutralization. Fear in this business has a particular flavor. It's not the fear of physical harm which liquidators are usually prepared for, but the fear of complete oblivion. The system doesn't just terminate a person's biological existence, it erases them from history. Their name vanishes from award lists, their face is retouched in group photographs, and their exploits are attributed to others or declared fabrications. For a person who lived for service, such a civil demise is the most terrifying thing. To be forgotten by one's own agency is the ultimate defeat. And it is precisely this tool of psychological pressure that was often used to force an agent to accept their fate. They were promised that if they played along, their family would be provided for, and their good name, albeit in narrow circles, would remain untarnished. But there was also a deeper ideological level to this conflict. Here, two incompatible systems of values clashed. On one side, the individual human life, their skills, their personal history, and their loyalty to duty. On the other, the cold national interest, which operates with categories of eternity and global stability. From the perspective of grand politics, the elimination of 1 or even 10 people who know too much is just a statistical error, a necessary measure to maintain world order. In this philosophy, morality is replaced by expediency. If preserving a secret requires terminating the functioning of one of its custodians, then this action is seen not as a crime, but as a necessary technical procedure, like replacing a worn-out filter in a complex machine. The paradox is that the better a liquidator performed their job, the more they sealed their own fate. A flawlessly executed operation, leaving no traces for the enemy, made the perpetrator themselves the only weak point. If they had made a mistake and been captured by the enemy, the system could have simply disavowed them. But when they returned triumphant, they brought with them knowledge that could not be controlled remotely. Thus, professionalism became a catalyst for the elimination process. The most capable, the quietest, and the most effective disappeared first, because their silence was the most valuable. Those who acted crudely and left traces often remained alive longer, as their information was already discredited by their own mistakes. At some point in this system, a fundamental shift occurs. It is a point of transformation when yesterday's operative finally realizes that there is no turning back. This realization often comes through an insignificant detail. For example, when an agent learns that their next target is their own mentor or a colleague with whom they have gone through dozens of trials. At this moment, the illusion of special brotherhood crumbles to dust. It becomes clear that the hierarchy of security is built not on mutual trust, but on mutual control, and the readiness of each to destroy each at the first command from above. This discovery changes the perception of reality. The world turns into a mirrored labyrinth where behind every reflection hides a threat, and the only law remains survival at any cost. An unexpected turn in the history of liquidators often occurred when they decided not to wait for their turn. In the annals of secret wars, there are episodes when elite specialists, sensing the smell of burning, disappeared hours before the cleaners came for them. They used all their skills to dissolve into the world they themselves helped shape. Changing appearance, fabricating high-quality fake documents, creating a chain of false trails. Everything the system taught them now worked against it. Such fugitives became a real nightmare for special services. After all, they knew the search methods, they knew the psychology of their pursuers, and, most importantly, they possessed information capable of blowing up the information space. A quiet hunt began, invisible to the ordinary person, which could last for decades. The culmination of this process always comes at the moment of truth, when two forces, born of the same structure, meet face to face. This does not necessarily happen in the form of an open confrontation. Often, it is a quiet conversation in a dimly lit park or an exchange of glances through a cafe window. At this point, all philosophical disputes and political slogans lose their meaning. Only the bare mechanics of power remain. The system tries to close a hole in its defense, and the person tries to defend their right to exist outside the framework of this system. In such clashes, there are rarely winners. Even if an agent manages to escape or force the leadership to leave him alone, his former life is destroyed forever. He remains in the shadows, constantly looking over his shoulder, understanding that his debt to silence has not yet been fully paid. History has arranged it so that many details of these internal purges became known only decades later, after the collapse of great empires or changes in political regimes. When archives were opened, researchers horrifiedly discovered long lists of people whose demise was dated weeks after their most resounding successes. By comparing the dates of awards and the dates of official obituaries, a chilling pattern could be seen. For example, 1940 became the final point for a whole galaxy of those who created the intelligence network in Europe. 1953 took with it those who knew too much about the last days of the great leader. Every major political turning point was accompanied by an unspoken reduction in staff among those who ensured this turn through forceful methods. The significance of these events goes far beyond historical essays. This is a lesson about the nature of power and the price an individual pays for involvement in its darkest secrets. We see how a structure created to protect certain values, over time, begins to devour itself, turning its defenders into victims. This is a universal truth. Any system based on absolute secrecy and violence, sooner or later, comes to the need to eliminate its own instruments. There is no personal animosity or cruelty in this, only the pure arithmetic of security. Today, in the age of digital technology, this process has become even more sophisticated. Physical elimination in many cases is replaced by digital execution, the complete destruction of personal data, blocking of accounts, and the creation of an informational vacuum around a person, which makes their presence in the world invisible. The modern world, it seems, has become more transparent, but the mechanisms governing the lives of superfluous people have not disappeared. They have merely adapted to new conditions. The concept of expendable material remains relevant for any organization operating on the edge of the law. Lessons from the past tell us that the greatest danger for a professional is not an enemy bullet, but trust in one's own system at the moment the task is already solved. The tragedy of the liquidators lies in the fact that, being masters of foresight, they often proved blind to their own fate. They believed in the exclusivity of their role, in the idea that their talents made them indispensable. But the logic of the system states, there are no indispensable people, only temporarily necessary ones. Concluding this journey through the labyrinths of secret services, we return to that very man in the empty apartment. The rain still taps on the glass, and the silence seems even heavier. He knows that tomorrow his name might disappear from all databases, and his face from the memory of those with whom he worked side by side. The price of his silence turned out to be higher than he could have imagined. It is the price of his own future. And in this final act, there is no pathos, only the cold realization that the machine he so long and faithfully lubricated is now aimed at him. His story is not just a tale of secret operations. It is a reflection on how easily a person turns into a number, into an impediment, into a superfluous link, if he allowed himself to become part of a mechanism that shows no mercy even to its creators. Every time we hear about the resounding successes of special services or the mysterious disappearances of people whose lives were connected with state secrets, one should remember this cold logic. The system never sleeps and never forgets its interests. And among these interests, there often appears a clause about the necessity of finally closing cases along with those who conducted them. This is a cycle of silence that begins with the first order and ends with the last breath in a room where there is no one left but the shadows of the past. Throughout human history, the structure of power has changed, but the principle of the superfluous person has remained unshaken. From the Praetorians of ancient Rome to modern cyberspace operatives, the path is always the same. Those who build walls of secrecy often find themselves walled up within them. And therein lies the main paradox. Striving to protect the state from threats, these people themselves become the greatest threat to it the moment their mission is completed. Thus, the circle closes, and history proves again and again that in the world of great secrets, the most reliable way to keep a secret is to ensure that there is no one left to tell it. Looking at the blank pages of official reports, we understand that behind every gap, behind every crossed-out line, there is a living destiny that was sacrificed so that the system could continue its functioning. These people vanished into oblivion not because they were bad at their job, but precisely because they were too good. Their mastery became their curse, and their loyalty their sentence. And this silence that follows their disappearance is the loudest characteristic of the price that must be paid for the right to peek behind the curtains of world history. The world of shadows does not tolerate sunlight, and those who are accustomed to living in darkness sooner or later dissolve into it forever. This is not a matter of choice. It is a matter of the physics of power. As soon as light is directed into a dark corner, the shadows disappear. And the liquidators, being themselves products of this darkness, depart with it, leaving behind only unanswered questions and the echo of footsteps in the empty corridors of headquarters. Their legacy is not territories or riches, but the silence that holds the truth about how life is truly structured at the top of the human pyramid. Ultimately, each of us, when faced with a choice between personal gain and loyalty to some system, must remember the fate of those who gave everything for an abstract, greater good. For a system is merely a set of rules and algorithms. It has no heart, no memory, and no gratitude. It only has functions. And if today your function is to create, tomorrow it might change to its opposite. The lesson of the liquidators is that one must always remain a human being, with something more than just official duty. Otherwise, at the moment the duty is fulfilled, nothing will remain of you but an empty space on the organizational chart. The year 2026, like hundreds of years before it, brought nothing fundamentally new to this scheme. Technologies only accelerated processes, but the essence remained the same. We still live in a world where information is the most expensive and most dangerous commodity, and those who guard this commodity will always be at risk. History continues, and new shadows are already preparing to take their places in a chain that will someday inevitably break open to swallow another superfluous link. Silence is not just the absence of sound. In the context of our theme, silence is an active process requiring constant sacrifices. And as long as there are secrets that can change the course of history, there will be those whose disappearance will guarantee tranquility for others. This is the eternal balance upon which our world rests. A fragile world built on the bones of those who knew too much and departed too quietly. Returning to the image of a man standing by the window on a rainy evening, we understand that his loneliness is not merely the absence of company, it is the state of a being already struck from the list of the living, though his heart still beats. He looks at the city lights and understands that he is a part of this mechanism, its most important and most unnecessary detail. And in this realization, there is a certain bitter solemnity. He has fulfilled his task. He has kept the secret. Now the secret must preserve him, in oblivion, which is the only true refuge for one who has looked too long into the abyss and seen his own reflection there. This path, from the first step in training camp to the last breath in obscurity, is the path of a warrior whose war was invisible and whose enemies were nameless. But in this war, there was its own aesthetic and its own logic, which we have tried to reveal. The logic of a system that knows no mercy, and the logic of a man who, until the last moment, believed in the meaning of his sacrifice. And if this story makes us, at least for a moment, ponder the true cost of security and stability, then the silence of those who disappeared was not in vain. It became a lesson for us, a lesson about how important it is to value human life above any state interests, and about how true truth will always find a way to break through any layer of secrecy, even if it takes centuries. The final chord of our narrative sounds not like a verdict, but like a warning. In a world where everything has its price, silence remains the most expensive resource, and those who pay for it with their lives forever remain in the foundation of our civilization, invisible, forgotten, yet essential. Their shadows roam the pages of history, reminding us that behind every great achievement stands a person whose path ended precisely when he became most dangerous to those he served. This is the price of silence, which we continue to pay day after day, year after year, in an endless pursuit of a peace that may never come.